Tori and I are back with a little live Substack conversation with one of the biggest heretics we could scrounge up anywhere
Rounds up, yeah.
in the Western Hemisphere. And
I mean,
we are
Costa
talking,
Rica.
we are talking Western Hemisphere because Jim's coming to us today from Costa Rica.
Oh,
Yep.
that's fabulous.
His non-religious theology cannot be contained in the greater 48 states.
No,
And so
I'm all in on Central America.
Nice.
this is truly an international conversation. It's amazing. How you
Good to
doing,
see you
Jim?
again. Good. I think the last time I saw you was OrcCon.
Yeah.
And then that was so controversial, I didn't even get invited to go back. Just kidding.
That's not true. That's
No,
not true.
I know it's not. I miss Brian McLaren, and I know you were there, and Tom Ward, and
Tori
my
was there too.
Oh, okay. Yeah, my Facebook memories kept on, popping up from when I was there. It was such a good time. It was so much fun. So I'm gonna see if I can pay off Tom and see if he'll invite me back
That sounds
one
good.
time.
Yep. Yeah, that's the way you get ahead with Tom. You just
Don't you love it when we hammer on poor Tom? I swear, he's not able to defend himself, but we love Tom. I miss him. I just live down the street from him. So, I've been following his recent work on Substack and his systematic theology. So, yeah.
Good.
cool. How are you doing, Tori?
I'm doing well this Friday.
All right.
Yeah. Just
love it.
survived the humidity in North Georgia.
Cool.
But I bet in
How
Costa
you doing?
Rica, is there humidity in Costa Rica?
Not really. And it never really gets beyond like 7. The average temp is 66
Oh,
Wow.
year round.
Love it.
So it doesn't really ever get over 70, mid 70s. So,
Beautiful.
but my runs are tough though, because it's hilly. There's some serious cyclists in Costa Rica, not as many runners it seems, but you really have some kick-ass cyclists. I mean, I don't even want to get my bike out. I'm afraid I'd start up the first hill in my cycling shoes and fall over because I wouldn't be able to get to the top, but maybe I'll keep working at it. So,
Keep working at it, man. You'll get there.
okay. All right.
How are you doing, Jonathan? I didn't ask you that.
Let's see. I think I'm doing fine. Yeah, I'm doing good. Fridays are always weird. So on Thursdays, we watch our granddaughter. It's the best day of the week. Like
Nice.
we go from, on a scale of 1 to 10, normal days, like a 2 to a 10 on Thursday. And then you're back to a 2 on Friday. Like I just miss Eleanor. I just want to hang out with her and wrestle all day like I did yesterday. So
That's
I
fabulous.
see James said try an e-bike, which,
hey, Jim, I was talking about my granddaughter.
I'm
So
sorry.
It's the most important
if
thing.
we could just stay on topic, bro,
Sorry.
that's all right.
I got ADHD. I'm not have ADHD. I'll claim that. I got ADHD, but
No, but that is true. An e-bike, that might be something to consider.
Seriously.
Yeah.
never. No, I'm
Just-
not.
Just pray about it, okay?
Okay.
All right. Speaking
you're
of
great.
prayer, how about Jim, share with us a little bit. First of all, I hope everyone gets a chance to subscribe to Jim's Substack channel and follow him on other places, Deconstructionology. And Jim has a wealth of experience in theological church, religious circles, as well as in non-religious circles, but they're all so interconnected. It's hard to tell where one ends and where another begins. I like to refer to Jim as the hardest working man on Substack, not James Brown, the hardest working man on show business, but the hardest working man in Substack, because every post is replete with paragraphs and volumes of work and sources cited.
What are you saying, Jonathan?
It's impressive. It is impressive.
That's what I'm
What are you
saying.
saying, man?
That's what I'm saying.
I recently, not too long ago, I ran into a Substack friend, Joe, who's got a great Substack newsletter on intersectionality and feminism. But anyway, she referred to my articles as long form. And I don't know, I hadn't heard that.
Yeah.
And so now it made me feel better. I can call it something, like not long winded or verbose. It's a long form article.
Yep.
So I do have a place in the universe.
Yep. You do. You do. And your place is with us for the next hour. And why don't you bring people up to speed who may not know about your story, like maybe some of the inciting incidents, things that catalyzed questions and caused change in your life. And we'll get started that way.
All right. So, kind of the Cliff Notes version for me is I grew up in a very volatile, traumatic, abusive childhood. And my senior year in high school at a McDonald's in Blacksburg, Virginia. Sorry about the dogs. Um, oh my God.
Real life. It's real.
Yes. Um, can you hear those dogs?
Yeah.
Yeah, we can.
Let me see if I can go back here. I'm sorry.
Well, this just proves you're not AI. We're just making sure people know you're real.
So, I after a very volatile childhood and youth at a McDonald's in Blacksburg, Virginia, the kicker on our football team who was involved in the Navigators, he shared that a relationship with Jesus Christ could really turn my life around. And so, sitting in the McDonald's, having an Egg McMuffin and a coffee, I bowed my head and I prayed the prayer and I became a born again Christian. And that was the summer right before I went off to college. I went to East Tennessee State University for my undergrad. And when I was there, like the first week, I ran into the guy who was the campus director for Campus Crusade for Christ International. We became friends. I majored in journalism, but discovered through my involvement with this Campus Crusade ministry that I had some leadership and speaking gifts. I didn't really know this, but they asked me to share my personal testimony in one of the campus meetings, and something came over me, and I just was able to deliver this compelling talk. And if you can stand up and talk in front of people, normally you're going to be sort of tagged to be involved in some sort of upfront or leadership role. So throughout my years in college, I was heavily involved in Campus Crusade for Christ. I was like this, the campus president for a couple years and so on. And I befriended a gentleman who was starting a church in Johnson City, Tennessee, which is where the school is. And I got involved in that church plant. It was an evangelical free church, was a sort of an evangelical type of church. And this pastor and I became friends. And through that relationship, he encouraged me to go to seminary and potentially become a pastor. So I moved up to Chicago, went to Trinity Divinity School, got my master's in divinity degree. While I was at Trinity, and I would do, had some preaching awards and stuff like this. And, and one of the professors said, hey, they're looking to add some pastors at this church in South Barrington, Illinois, called Willow Creek. If I were you, I've talked to them about you, and I'd go down there for an interview. So anyway, there I go trying to hunt down Willow Creek, which I couldn't find. I mean, I drove past it about 10 times because I didn't realize it wasn't like a church. It was like a campus, and it was huge at that time. Well, it was the largest church in North America. It's not anymore, but in that period it was. And so went there, interviewed, with Bill Hybels and Don Cousins and, people that were sort of the leaders of the church. And I joined their pastoral team and served there until the idea was, well, what would you think about going into another part of the country and planting a church like Willow Creek in the South, right? Because Willow Creek was the North and they wanted to go to the South. So I moved to Nashville, Tennessee, planted a seeker-oriented kind of Willow Creekish sort of church in the Nashville, Tennessee area. And I did that for a number of years, grew that church, um, and had a crisis of faith. And the crisis of faith had to do with the fact that I started noticing that despite my, bulletproof seminary, uh, you know, developed evangelical theology, uh, that the people's problems in our church persisted. And I couldn't figure out why this was. I knew my theology was good, but I just noticed, anxiety, depression, broken relationships, like they just persisted. And then in a rare moment of self-honesty, I realized that, well, it wasn't that different for me. I was anxious, I was burnt out, I suffered from my own struggles, and I knew that there was something that was fundamentally wrong with what was going on with my beliefs, my theology, my ministry, and so on. So I became more and more discomforted by this and ultimately decided that I needed to walk away and figure out what was wrong. So, in a big public controversy, I resigned as pastor of this church. I kind of walked away from Christianity, my faith, to never be heard from again. I kind of blended into the woodwork of life, to figuring out what went wrong. And it was that point when I started writing a little bit about my silly about my journey out of religion. And a individual at a major Christian publishing house started reading my blog. And this was back when Don Miller's Blue Like Jazz book had just come out and was popular and so on. And not many people were really writing about religious deconstruction. And he said, "Have you ever thought about writing a book about your journey out of religion? I think this is really fascinating." So that kind of started, by um, you know, publishing work. The first book was Divine Nobodies, and I ended up publishing 6 books about my journey out of religion. Then along the way, countless people would contact me and they would share with me, "Jim, I'm in church. I have my doubts. I'm struggling. I just left religion. I'm not sure what to do." And this was way back when, before religious deconstruction was really a thing. It was certainly before religious trauma syndrome was on anybody's radar. So I just kind of stumbled my way forward to work with people, who were having a difficult time separating from their religion and experiencing all kinds of existential challenges and so on. So for many, many, many years, I've been working with people in that regard. I think recently I tallied up that about 40,000 hours I've spent working with people individually and in groups and doing research and creating methods for, approaching religious deconstruction and so on. And ultimately that led to my starting the Center for Non-Religious Spirituality, through which I train people to be non-religious spiritual directors and existential health counselors. And it's an online network of resources and forums and community, and spiritual directors that do individual and group spiritual direction with people who have left religion. And so our latest training is coming up in August. We have 60 people enrolled in the training. I think Brittany Hardley. She's kind of teaming up with me to lead this next class of
Brittany, who's
trainees.
crushing it on TikTok.
Yeah, she's a TikToker for sure.
She's like
So
hundreds of thousands of followers.
yeah, so that's kind of the Cliff Notes version.
Cool.
Loosely raised Catholic and a volatile childhood, becomes a born again Christian in McDonald's, goes off to college and discovers these charismatic gifts and leadership skills. Starts out ministry as a mega church pastor, leaves to kind of take on and build and create my own church, and develop my how it is in the Christian world, that if you succeed, there's a certain amount of celebrity and excitement, and you go around and speak at church growth conferences and things like this, until I read headlong into the fact that my religion wasn't working. It wasn't working for them. It wasn't working for me. You can build a successful church numerically, but it not necessarily be something that's deeply transforming people's lives. And that's where I was at. And so I walked away to figure out what was wrong. And that ultimately sent me headlong into a world of people who struggle with religion, leave religion, and that, this was 25 years ago when I started, and it's just sort of like evolved since then. I mean, we know there is sort of a de-churching of America. We know that the religious nuns or duns are the largest single identifiable group, for example, in the United States. And we know that currently, there's a lot of discussion about being in a meta crisis at the core of which is something that people refer to as the meaning crisis. And so I think this is why there's just continued interest in people who want to be trained to address this, to help people through their belief system deconstruction and reconstruction. And, the landscape of post-religion spirituality has really shifted. I mean, there's people that pivot to, ex-evangelicals pivot to a more progressive Christianity. Some people pivot to atheism. Some people put things together uniquely, for example, with Christian atheism. And so there's, a lot that's going on in this space. But I would have to say that, Gen Z and Gen Alpha seem to be continuing this sort of migration out of religion. And, Gen Z, for example, those who identify as atheists is double the general population. It looks like, Gen Alpha is sort of continuing down this track of a sort of disillusionment with organized religion, and even taking that deeper into a real questioning on an existential level about the existence of God and the meaning of life and things like this. Now the Pew Research has kind of said it's leveled off. This decline, has leveled off, but there is a sense that it's possible by 2070 that, less 35% of the American population will identify as Christian, which is a big difference from 91% back in the, in the 70s. So it's gone from 91% potentially to 35%. And so there's just a lot going on with people along those lines.
Yeah. So would you say this decline, how would you characterize it? Is that a positive thing?
Yeah.
Or is that a negative thing?
Well, I think that, so a couple things is that, we all have to be careful, I guess, with using the word religion, because one person's experience of religion isn't representative of all people's experience of religion. So, I try to qualify what I say in terms of referring to it as toxic religion, for example, which I could describe and define. But the point is that, not all religion is fundamentalist or toxic. Having said that, there are a lot of people who fundamentally believe that religion, for whatever good it might do, always does more harm than good. And we could have a conversation about why, many people would think that. I mean, the late Chris Hitchens' view was that religion poisons everything. And I think that he probably went too far in some of the ways that he spoke about this, but the point's kind of well taken about how much good in the end, the net positive of religion. So, um, I think that there's a short-term problem and a long-term, victory with the migration out of religion. I think that the short-term problem is that, and this isn't the first time this has happened in history. I mean, like, um, God has 9 lives, right? So, like, over the course of history, the idea of God and God is it's sort of like risen and declined in various ways according to the tides of culture and so on. Nietzsche back in the 1880s declared God is dead, and that kind of created this existential uh, wasteland or void that had to be addressed. So I think that's the short term problem is that a mass exodus from religion is problematic in my view because religion sets people up for the deep existential crisis and for nihilism. And the way that it does that is that a lot of religion wraps all existential realities around what I call the master signifier of God. God is a word that we chose. We use it to approximate something on the level of ultimate reality. For Christians, that's usually theism, monotheism, the Christian theism, and virtually everything about a person's identity is related to that master signifier, your identity, the meaning and purpose in life, the basis of all morality, the essential, existential architecture of the universe, your relationships, everything revolves around that master signifier. So, like when you pull the thread and start questioning it, and all that theological scaffolding starts to kind of crumble, in which God was at the top, then you have sort of people sifting through the religious rubble, wandering around trying to figure out, okay, where do I go from here? And the problem is compounded by the fact that religion often also prevents a person from some essential areas of human development,
Mm.
Critical thinking ability. There's sometimes a sort of delayed emotional development, and there are other factors where a person just doesn't have the tools once they're in the rubble to put together another path going forward. So I call them nihilistic nomads, at least that group. Not all people go there, but I kind of talked about this in the article that I published today on Substack. So, like, the short term problem is the meaning crisis, right? Like, people that are having a very difficult time finding their way forward. Um, I think the long term benefit is that, in my view, now, hold on, let me hold on.
I
Just a
don't.
quiet lament back there.
Okay,
Yeah, it's
how's
just
that for real?
yeah. I don't actually hear the dog that much, so don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Okay, so um, I think that the long term gains, nihilism gets a bad rap because I think that nihilism is a useful and might even be a necessary aspect of a person's spiritual journey and human development. Um, because you first once you deconstruct away so many of the sort of religious doctrines and teachings, um, like for a lot of people, that's a good thing, right? It's a clearing to reconstruct into something that's more sound, healthy, whole. Um, and so I think the long term gains can be, um, quite significant. I sometimes refer to what happens in religion as existential codependency. Everything, you're nothing apart from relationship with God. There's no purpose or meaning apart from relationship with God. There's no real grounded identity apart from relationship with God. There's no basis for morality apart from relationship with God. Like it's all caught up in the idea of relationship with God. So like if you're codependent and the relationship comes to an end and there's no longer that person for whom you've depended on all those things, then it's very difficult to start over. Um,
Yes. So
Yeah.
Awesome. So I heard you say short term, it's problematic because things crumble. People are, going a variety of different ways and panicking, trying to figure out life. Long term, it's potentially good because the reality is humans kind to be a healthy human, you kind of need to, I don't want to say need, but it's beneficial to go through these really challenging things and then have to recreate meaning and figure out what you believe, something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and our species had modern humans, modern Homo sapiens, we have a 300,000 year track record. We can do hard things. Like we can adapt and survive and flourish. And religion, I think, played a critical role in the survival of our species early on, particularly because of, or what we would use the word religion to describe, I think was a central part of our evolution as a species, because we needed some kind of psychological resiliency to keep the project of human survival going forward. Like think about the first modern humans, somebody die, you experience death for the first time. Or natural disasters and so on. Like how there's got to be, you got to come up with a way to cope with and make sense of and develop a psychological um, resiliency and immunity system to survive. And that's what religion and religious thinking and religious ideas, you could call it that, did early on. We might not have survived had we not done that. Um, but at the same time, it can also end up becoming what can limit our continued growth and development. Like it got us to a certain place, and maybe it's not necessary in the same ways it was previously, or we need to rethink. We need to rethink how we approach it, like religion. Because one of the things that religion does, for example, one of the things that sometimes religion does is it creates a scenario where people avoid the givens of human existence. They deny the givens of human existence to their own detriment. And so that's why nihilism can be useful, because it kind of breaks through denial and avoidance and, sort of forces a person to cultivate a constructive relationship with those givens, human mortality, human insatiability, human groundlessness, that these are all sort of characteristics of the lived human experience that we can only deny, avoid, or pretend or spiritual bypass for so long, to our own detriment.
I think it's really well put. Like nihilism can be really useful and helpful. And that doesn't sound so scary either, because nihilism itself is such a scary word. Tori, what have you been thinking as Jim's been talking?
Brain is going in all this is that deconstruct, and I think all three of us, as we sit here, I mean, we all have experiences of some major deconstructions happen in our lives, right? For sure, certainly. So that deconstruction doesn't feel as scary, right? And it also feels like a very natural part of human development, right? And then what I'm also wondering is, in terms of species, are we now moving towards and developing where religion isn't as essential, right? In the same way. So I'm thinking this of in terms of individual, but also the human species and how we're developing. Love your thoughts.
Yeah. Well, I there are times when I thought that one day I will be delivering a lecture entitled "The Age of Religion," where I'm going back with students and looking at and exploring why our species created religion, how it served our species, the problems, and then it kind of running its course. And and something, and morphing into something else, or another way you go at it is just talk about, well, what is the future of religion? What is the future of religion? Is there a future religion? And if there is, like, what is it exactly, right? Because people leave, um, either fundamentalist or evangelical or monotheistic religion. And of course, there's all sorts of other configurations: pantheism, panentheism, panpsychism, and sort of build a new framework to go forward with. I think what I tend to see is that people are hesitant to, they don't it's very difficult to shrink wrap people into a fixed belief system, ideology, or ism.
Mhm.
And people are very concerned also about adopting a label, because there's so much baggage associated with religious labels that they're prone not to want to identify with one. Like, I could say Christian, but what do we really mean? Are we talking about a fundamentalist, far right Christian nationalist Christian, or if we're talking about a progressive DEI Christian, and it's just not even worth using the term anymore because it's almost the same thing with the word God. Like, there's so much baggage associated, with the term. Religion also historically has been very human centric, and that's been a real downfall to some extent. Is it really sees religion sort of encourages this idea that the human being is sort of the apple of God's creation and really the center of God's divine plan. And I think that this is highly, well, problematic, and not even, it is not true, and it's problematic. The people adopt this anthrocentric view of their place in the world and the universe. And so, there's all sorts of different ways I think people put things together going forward. Um, and it's hard to say whether or not, um, I think what, a question kind of inside the question you asked would be also, what do you do with God?
Mhm.
Is there a post God, you know, um, framework, existential framework or understanding of life, that excludes all traditional ideas of God as sort of the big other, um, this supernatural being. Um, I've done some work around that in terms of, like, the idea of Christian atheism, which is one stream of sort of way of thinking about that. Um, you have people like, I think it's Roberto Unger, who wrote a book on the future of religion, and others that feel, if they could, they would erase the word God from, the English language altogether, just not to even use the word anymore. I mean, there are like something like 40 or 50,000 English words that have become obsolete. They no longer appear in the dictionary and they're no longer used. There's some people who believe that God, the word God, should be one of them.
I think
I don't
most
know.
of those 40 or 50,000 words were in several of the books I've written. That's the way it feels.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think they actually start with my books because they figure they can find a few in each chapter.
Okay.
They just
Okay.
that they could just scrap.
I have another thought. This is fascinating because Jim, I think one of the first, I think maybe Jonathan's Substack and your Substack were the first two Substacks I subscribed to when I got on Substack, which is fascinating, right?
I'm sorry for that.
No, it's good. It's good. But you talk and you even hear philosophically, like it's rich, this depth, right? But what strikes me is what set you on this journey of deconstruction. What it seems to me, anyway, was about the very real struggle, existential struggle of the people in your community, right? So this very
Mhm.
practical, very like lived experience. And I'm struck by that. I don't even know that I have a question. It just really stands out to me that as you're speaking so philosophically and richly and all of this, the reality is that this journey begins with the very real problems and issues that people were experiencing day to day. Powerful to me.
Yeah, one of the things I talked about in the article I did today was the whole matter of cognitive dissonance, which is a running theme among all the different reasons why a person would leave religion, and there are many different reasons. Um, and but because the cost of leaving religion for so many people is so significant, right? Think about all you lose
Mhm.
if you make the decision to walk away and question your faith. Means that people will tolerate a certain degree of cognitive dissonance. They'll find a way to manage it and tolerate it so that they can continue their affiliation with religion. Um, but with a lot of cognitive dissonance, and this is where a lot of people like today I talk about like in the article the early questioners, and sometimes they'll ask me like, okay, they're sitting in church, they're starting to doubt stuff, something's not adding up, and the question is like, well, do I leave? Do I stay or should I go? Right? Like, which one of these
Oh,
things? And what I found usually is once you start questioning, like you're going to try to make it work. The cognitive dissonance can be overcome by focusing on the positive and just like um, appreciating all enjoying what's good about the church experience. But ultimately, it's likely that that cognitive dissonance becomes so distressing that a person can't do it anymore. So the cost of staying is greater than the cost of leaving. And so they will make the choice and they will separate from their religious faith. So it's religion has done such a good job of keeping people devoted and committed despite their personal experience in some cases, and a lot of that's called fear, right? Like there's a lot of fear associated with toxic religion. I mean, there are people who years after they leave religion still have those moments where did I do the right thing? What if there really is a hell? Maybe God is like I'm condemned in the eyes of God. So religion doesn't builds a lot of it is sort of perpetuated in the climate of fear and guilt and shame and things like that. Now, I always feel like I need to do the plug for all the religious people who don't do any of that, right? Or all the religious groups that are not toxic, do not teach the existence of eternal conscious torment or hell, and have a more progressive and liberating theology than you find, in other places. And so that's definitely a step in the right direction. I think the problem with conceiving of God, regardless of how progressive it might be, is that at the end of the day, you still end up with a thing called God that by definition is something that's kind of different from you, or we wouldn't have created another noun to identify this separate thing. And there are people like Mary Daly, who was a feminist, um, theologian who argued that, well, think about God as a verb, not a noun. And of course, Whitehead and process philosophy and even open and relational theology, like conceives these other panentheistic views of God are a step in the right direction. Or, it can be useful. But there's still something called a God that's a distinct thing from whatever you are. Um, and so that's something to at least consider or to I mean, we have to use language. We created language in order to make sense of the world, but it has some serious limitations also, kind of what it it's hard to use the word God without conceiving some form of separation. And because theism has so dominated the God conversation, it's just hard for people to get that idea out of their head, even if they reconstruct a more progressive view of it.
Yeah. So
Mhm.
if I could interject for a second, first of all, I hope people, I will interject. I hope people are subscribing, and you've referenced your article today. That was called Ode to the Duns or
Well,
something? What was that called?
it's called it was the
Oh,
title is
letters.
Love
Love
Letters to
letter.
the Recently Departed,
There
which
we
is
go.
not a reference to people who've recently died, but to people who have left religion.
Right.
And then I think the subtitle is Ode to the Duns, the people who are done,
Mm.
with religion. And let me just say one more thing, is that I'm not anti-religion, which is probably surprising after you heard everything I just said, but I really see just this incredible amount of significance and feels like the philosophy of religion, the psychology of religion, the anthropology of religion. Like these fields of study and investigation are very rich for the purposes of human and spiritual development. And so, you know, one of my criticism of what used to be called the new atheists, Dawkins, Harris, Dennett, and Hitchens, is that they really, to some extent, set up a straw man by attacking fundamentalist theist religion. Like I think most people can agree on most rational people will see how absurd that is, but they also sort of wrote off all religious interest as either stupidity, ignorance, or mental illness. And although they've softened, Dawkins and Harris, Didn't Hitchens are no longer living, but they have definitely, well, I would say that they have found space for the exploration of realities that fall more into spirituality, for example, and maybe even religion than pure, materialism or the scientific method and so on, and so um I mean Carl Jung saw Jesus as one of the most central archetypes for the self. I mean, like you shouldn't just write off religion. Sure, I mean, like that's kind of there'd be no reason to write off everything associated with the field or what we talk about by using the word religion. In my mind, is very closed-minded and short-sighted and a failure to appreciate what it has to say and offer in terms of understanding the human person. Sorry, Jonathan, that was like a 20-minute dissertation.
No,
Wait,
that's no, it's excellent point. And right, Sam Harris is into Buddhism, which is you can do that non-dualistic. You know this better than I do. Buddhism without necessarily believing in God, but it does definitely get into the spiritual realm in ways that the new atheism movement probably wouldn't have wanted to a few years ago. So I was just going to say, there's so many different directions to go. I was just going to make sure people knew who were logging on or listening to this later. Probably most people do. Most people probably logging on to listen to you have already worked through some of these things. But there's a great deal of people who are trying to process the depths of this discussion and not leave it at the fundamentalist, the thinnest, layer, which is just, some of it's just absurd. And for me, the depth, I'm not saying I'm just saying for me, the depth of the discussion has to do something with love. Like I've been able to happily lay aside a lot of the religious baggage, and I'm fine with denying a whole bunch of it, because first of all, I think Jesus did, and Jesus is a big influence on my life. But I've never been able to lay aside or deny the reality of love. Of course, there it is. That's a word again, but it's been a helpful word rather than God. And I'm still interested in Christianity. I'm not saying you should be or the listeners should be or have to be, but I am. But what's particularly helpful is my sacred text says that God is love. And so I've been just trying to follow some of the breadcrumbs of people like Whitehead and Tom Ord and Catherine Keller and Ilya DeLeo, by the way, who will be on next week on our Substack, and try to double click on love and try to vet what that word means, because in my moments where everything else was gone, like literally, well, I guess I don't know if I can say literally, it felt like everything was gone. I've never felt like love has abandoned me. And so I think love, I want to say all that to say, back to Tori's question, what's the future of religion? If the religion has to do with what Girard said, which was scapegoating violence, which is anti-love, I hope that's not the case. I fear it probably is. But if if religion has to do with keeping us tethered, because religion means tethering, connected to love, and to vet the definition of love, I'm down for that. And the ironic thing about you is people probably don't know unless they read you or listen to you, is I think you have a lot to say about love. And I find that really, really compelling, and I'm thankful for that. And I hope people are able to reorient some of their lives around your work because of that.
Yeah, I think that a conversation that I had with an atheist, and the question was, well, do you believe in God? And that's how it started. I didn't know he was an atheist at the time. Do you believe in God? And he said, no, I'm an atheist. And so we chatted a little bit beyond that. And I said, well, let me just out of curiosity, do you believe in love? And he that's kind of a strange question, right? Because like nobody doesn't not believe in love, right? Like somehow we know instinctually that like love is love is good, giving it or receiving it. You could argue that the love is the culmination of any religion, philosophy. It's the highest. It's considered to be the highest characteristic of the Homo sapien, the ability to love. You could argue that the greatest need in the world is for people to love and to be loved. You could, on it, and he's like, well, it's kind of a dumb question, right? Like, of course, I believe in love, and so, of course, the follow-up question is, well, what if I told you that if I told you that God is love, would you believe in God? And of course, to be intellectually honest, a question like that, you would have to say yes. If you're telling me that like God is love, like that's what it is, that's what God is, then, like obviously, of course I would believe in that because I believe in love. If God is love and love is God, then the two are synonymous, then this would be something that I could really, embrace and hold on to. I think part of the problem is that we just, for some reason, there are some people who think that the Bible is the proper and maybe the only source of which to derive absolute truths. And then we really put the burden on us to try to figure out what the truth is. And so we're always reimagining it, reinterpreting it, reframing it, repurposing it, like to come up with better and better interpretations to kind of scrub all the fundamentalist stuff that none of us, we all know that that can't be right, and it really have anything to do with God. I think the problem is that way back at the beginning point, which is that what do you really think that the Bible is? Like I don't think necessarily, for example, the Bible was a book from which was the basis of like arriving at a systematic theology. I don't even think it is the basis of arriving at a coherent understanding of God. Like if you're basing your whole thing on the Bible and your interpretation of it, then I think it's really a difficult path to travel. People say all the time, well, my authority is in the Bible. And I usually counter it with, well, what you probably actually mean is that my authority is in what they told me at church the Bible means, right? Because, like, what part of it do you interpret literally? What part do you interpret metaphorically or symbolically? Um, and so if you're thinking that the Bible was meant to be a landing strip to, you know, extricate these absolutes, then that could be a problem versus it being um, not a landing strip, but a launching pad to, draw you into a conversation of, what it means to relate to the all the existential realities of life, um, so I think that sometimes some Christians are hampered by the fact that they feel like burden to try to figure it out somehow in and through a certain interpretation of the Bible, you know? Like, for example, I'm not sure you need a Bible to know that love is the thing.
Right.
And then you have all the people who are holding a Bible that says that love is the thing, God is love, and they're like, kind of mired in all this other stuff that is not really in alignment with the idea of love, or they just get bogged down in a bunch of stuff that maybe doesn't really matter all that much in the end.
You know what's interesting?
So
In human evolution, what if we hadn't had the Bible? I suspect we'd have had something else, and that something else would probably also be a story, a convoluted, messed up story full of good and bad. Like, I think one of the great things about the Bible is I learned about how Jesus voluntarily became a scapegoat to subvert the scapegoating system. But if I didn't have the Bible, I wonder if Jesus or someone else would have been written about in some other sacred text where we would have learned it, but we would have also worshiped the damn word so much that we wouldn't even be able to see the freaking forest for the trees. So we're such a humans are such a mess, man.
yeah, we definitely can be, but I think that one of the benefits of religion and the organization of religion is that like if you're thirsty and there's an ocean of water, you probably need to go down there with a cup or something to get the water to drink it. So the idea of God and existential absolutes and all this kind of thing, I mean, it's like an ocean, and religion does such a good job of making it accessible, right? We do need things to be accessible. You know, I mean, organization's not necessarily bad, right? Like, what would you do if you woke up? I mean, we have routines, we have schedules, we have information that we put in the books that are useful for different purposes and so on. So, religion does a very good job of doing that, and so there has to be ways to support and to kind of catechize people into a liberative way of living, or at least there are some people for whom that would really be useful, you
Yeah.
know, and religion and one of my criticisms of atheists, although I concede it's not the job of an atheist to help a religion leaver deconstruct and figure out what to do going forward. But I do think sometimes my disappointment is that the atheists like to say, well, God doesn't exist. And if you think so, you're an idiot or you're mentally ill. And then they walk away um, without taking responsibility for the tools and the skills and the resources available for people to work through their post-religion transition. I mean, not all atheists, but I'm just saying that, like, that the difference between atheism and humanism really is that atheism is more just a position that a lack of belief in the existence of God or gods, whereas humanism is more of a philosophy of life outside the framework of a belief in God and the supernatural. And humanism tends to like sort of put it out there practically, the elements of living a life um outside the framework of God and the supernatural.
Mhm, mhm. Tori, what have you been thinking?
I've been thinking I'm back to, as I've been listening to Jim, I again, I'm gonna kinda return to where I was before because it still strikes me as profound.
Yeah, I think it is.
It is, which is this willingness that you have, it feels like to me as I read your writings and I'm listening to you, to this great empathy and acceptance and non-judgment about where people are in their
Mm,
right, of deconstruction, and I think it's beautiful and I think it's powerful. And I as a therapist, like, there's something in that that just resonates with me and my approach to therapy, right? Where I'm just meeting people where they are. I'm not trying to switch it up. I'm not trying to shift it. I just wanna really listen, and that comes across your willingness to sit with people in all their experiences. I think
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, I think that the one of the most important things to know, for example, as a spiritual director,
Mhm. Mhm.
is to be very careful of sort of preferencing your spiritual path or belief system on other people, which is hard to do, especially for people that come out of religion, because we all think, there's one right way and I figured out what it is. And now I've got to sort of steer everybody into it. And versus the idea that what we're really doing as spiritual directors, Carl Rogers uh, really built on this idea in what's called person-centered therapy. The idea is that every human being has an innate proclivity towards growth and actualization and fulfillment. What we do as counselors is we provide the ingredients and the environment for that person to, in their own autonomy and independence and freedom, to cultivate their path forward. So we give them positive regard, empathy, understanding, and so on. We don't like go in suggesting that, well, maybe you should read this book so you can like believe this. Or one of the biggest mistakes in religious deconstruction work is what I call the belief system swap, which is, out with all the old bad theology and here read Richard Rohr or whoever, and that, like that's your new thing. I love Richard Rohr, and we've talked several times over the years, but the point is not a belief system swap. The point is for a person to cultivate a different kind of relationship with themselves so that they're kind of self-authoring their path forward. Now, I don't mean self-authoring, meaning you go sit in a room and you just like it all goes on in your head, because part of self-authoring is being very engaged and observant about being with the rest of the world. Like one of the biggest mistakes I think with developing your own philosophy of life, your own like belief system, is this idea that it's the individualized or even self-actualization, that it's a sort of individualized process. It's happening inside a realm of relationality. And Simone de Beauvoir talked about this in the Ethics of Ambiguity, that you know, it's a being with the world. It's not a a purely individualistic philosophy creation that you did because you took a course on the existential philosophers, although I'm a big fan of the existential philosophers. But, you know, um, I have a friend, Paul Musso, who developed the concept of a micro philosophy, which is sort of the idea of you creating and constructing an approach to life. The way that you get rid of cognitive dissonance, which people find in religion, is that you have to cultivate a consonance where your core beliefs, your speaking, your actions, your behaviors are aligned. And the reason that cognitive dissonance creates a psychological discomfort, and that's the motivation for someone to change something in the equation, because we look for a harmonious, unitive, consonant life.
Yeah.
Like that's part of the definition, not definition, but a description of a whole person is this harmony. And the more that that's not true, like what you really believe is different from what you say, and your actions don't really represent. I mean, then it becomes a very discomforting tension. I'm only sad that we didn't talk about Christian atheism.
Well, we can
Which
still
is
do that, man.
which is not true. I'm not actually sad, but I just looked up at the time.
No, that was a
Lovely
that was a
way to put that, though.
yeah, that was a that was a fantastic answer, and I'm so glad, Tori, that you brought us back to that because it is that human connection that if we're not in the middle of that at some level, then what everything else is a little bit worthless. So I think that was
You have some
important.
you have some smart people listening because their comments are like super good.
Are.
I need to subscribe to all these people and maybe I'll learn something.
Yeah. Well, maybe they listen to you. Maybe that's why they're smart.
No, that's
Mm,
the anyway.
No, no.
All right, so you want to do Christian atheist? No, we got to go.
um,
I think I could do it in 30 seconds. But
I don't think you can do anything in 30
good point.
seconds.
You're right. You're right. You're right.
How about tell us about Costa Rica? Why are you living there? You were in Canada last year. You're in Costa Rica now. What's the next country you're planning to take over in your slow march of global domination?
Well, I don't know. So when you think about it, it's interesting. The world's a big place, right? So one of the narratives is you just where you were born, you stay your whole life, right? But why do we think this way? Like there's so much to learn and gain from understanding um the lived human experience from many different perspectives. That's one of the reasons why I include a lot of discussion of intersectionality in the religious deconstruction and training existential health practitioners. That's why I follow the Feminism for All Substack by Joe because she's really into intersectionality. So we lived almost our entire adult lives in the US. My daughter's grown up. She's 26. She has a career in social work. We went to Canada for about 6 months, and now we're going to here in Costa Rica. My daughter has actually spent time in Honduras, El Salvador, and Ecuador, Honduras, Ecuador, and El Salvador. But I've never spent a lot of time in Central America. I mean, I've been to Africa, Thailand, places in the UK, and so on. So, you know, um, we decided on living in a little Tico village in Cachi, Costa Rica, where we have a Spanish tutor trying to learn more Spanish and just living the local Costa Rican life. So, um, it's I don't know how long we're going to be here, but this is where we're at now. So I tried to see if Jonathan would come out, but we'll see if he's we have an extra room, so we're hoping he comes out for a visit.
Nice.
I'm praying about it.
I swear. Next time we'll go over all the Christian phrases that people use that they
Okay. Sounds good. Well, thanks so much for hanging out with us. People probably also know they can find you on Amazon and all the other places. Multiple books. Subscribe to his channel. Appreciate what you do.
Absolutely.
I appreciate the two of you a whole lot. And you creating spaces for people to explore spirituality, apart from that high control, authoritarian, literalist, fundamentalist, disempowering sort of religious mindset, you know. Um, so, you know, you're two people it's always easy to send people to because I know that they'll find the kind of love like you talked about, Jonathan, and a place of acceptance like Tori mentioned, and of course you're both brilliant in your own right and all the things you've written and you've been doing in your own work. So I appreciate both of you.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it, man. Well, let's do it again
Okay.
sometime.
All right. We will.
Peace, everybody.
All right. Goodbye for now.
See ya.
Bye-bye.